Yeah, well, you think they're judging you too.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, it just feels weird. It feels like, what are we even doing in here? I could talk to my wall for free. Um, and I also acknowledge that it's really important for therapists to have boundaries with their clients, and also never to disclose anything that causes like your client to have to take care of you, anything like that, anything that would make your client sort of feel bad or anything. So there are limits to it, but I do think that there is a lot of value in disclosing similarities. I mean, I've in my sessions I'll have clients, and they'll talk about like, oh, this happened and I had this thought, and does that make me crazy? And I'll say, oh my God, I think that all the time,
Right. Yeah, you're
and
normalizing it for them. Yeah.
exactly, normalizing it, letting them know like, yeah, dude, it's cool. Like, you're not the only one with these thoughts. It's fine. And so I think that, there is value in disclosing things about us that we find to be important about us, right? Maybe you don't consider your race to be a big part of your identity. Maybe you don't consider your gender identity to be a big part of your identity, right? So you don't necessarily need to broadcast things that you don't feel particularly connected to, but if it is something that you're really connected to, if you do think of those traits as big parts of your identity, like, I think it makes sense to let people know that, because there may be something that they see there that really makes them feel comfortable, makes them feel willing to engage with you. And I think it would allow a lot of people who probably don't feel super comfortable with the idea of therapy to kind of go like, well, maybe that girl kind of reminds me of my sister, maybe I could talk to her, that girl, that guy seems like he really understands where I'm coming from, and he's kind of part of my community too. So, maybe I can talk to him. I think that there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, no, and to that point, anybody who's listened to this podcast recently will know that I've interviewed, and recently Zephyr Wellness, is my agency, has partnered with Walk the Talk America. There's this whole group of people out there who are gun owners who avoid therapy for this completely misperceived reason that somehow they're going to lose their gun rights if they come and seek treatment. And as a consequence, people are getting sick and they're dying. And some of those gun owners are not just people who like to go plink in the hills and they're competitive shooters and that kind of thing, but some of them are police officers and military, current and former, who, by the way, police officers now are dying at a rate that's by their own hand. They're dying by suicide faster and more frequently than they're dying in the line of duty. First time we've ever seen that. And they're afraid to come in and get help because they think they're going to be judged. And I think that's horrible. And so that's part of the partnership there. So there's a half plug, but it's relevant to the conversation that, maybe we all need to kind of come out of the closet a little bit with our own personal interests and make a warm, welcoming, inviting environment for folks of all stripes. And the best way to do that, like you say, is to recruit more people into the field who are of a diverse nature, so that we're not just this, homogenized, whitewashed community of psychotherapists.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a part of that too, in terms of the recruitment, is, similarly making that space a welcoming space for more diverse therapists. I'll share a little story. I'm not going to name any specific names because I don't want to stir up drama, but I was
drama.
I was part of a Facebook group that was, mental health professionals. And there was and it was just something where, we could all kind of, it was like a local group, and we could provide each other with referrals, and we could ask for, advice, consultation, announce seminars, stuff like that. Just, I'm sure those exist everywhere. And so there was an incident where one of the members of the group made a really culturally insensitive comment to one of the Asian American therapists. And then another group member sort of came to the defense of the culturally insensitive group member. And it just got to this really nasty altercation where the therapists of color in the group were really being kind of silenced and invalidated. And a lot of the white members of the group were, kind of digging in their heels and sort of saying like, well, no, I don't really think we did anything wrong. And it was really just kind of awful to watch it play out because, first of all, you're like, you people are therapists. Like, come on,
right.
we got to be better than this. And, it ended up being that some of the therapists of color actually just like created a whole different group. And they actually, and I know that they had a specific group for therapists of color, which I think makes a lot of sense to be able to have that space. But it also just felt like, wow, like we are not making this a space that is welcoming, that is inclusive. Like, we have sent a very clear message right now that, we're not going to be reflective. We're not going to be self-analytical about our own racial biases or our own biases about whatever. And it felt like such a bummer moment where I was like, ugh, like I really expected more. And was really disappointed. And I was talking to one of my friends who's Latina, and she was just like, yeah, I'm not really surprised when I see that kind of stuff in the group. And I was just like, man, I'm so disappointed, and also just like need to like be better at recognizing that stuff goes on, and be more outspoken against it and be more aware of it. But it was just such a yucky situation and was just so disappointing. And it just made me think like, this is not like, we're not doing a good enough job of making this an inclusive, safe space for people.
Yeah, and I think I'm hearing a couple of things there. One is that the result of that interaction was very poor because it just fed to the us versus them, right? So you got people, therapists of color who strike off and they're like, "Well, we don't want to be a part of this anymore. We're going to segregate." That's not good. And then you got people who are ostensibly these lifelong learners, introspectionists, deep thinkers who are unwilling to examine their own positions, which you alluded. And such that it can reconcile that rift, and I think that's problematic because they're trotting themselves out there to be open-minded and helpful and being able to not turn away any parties and that kind of thing. And then the third thing I picked up on is this idea that we as therapists are, I guess as white therapists too, we somehow like. We're responsible for creating the culture and the dynamic, but yet you acknowledge, and I've acknowledged this too in my own world, where we're surprised that they're not surprised that it goes on. And it's like, oh man, I got to align my expectations with reality too. We're still not there. We're still not there. Feels like we are sometimes because, again, from my little privileged perch, I don't get to, detect all the insensitive comments going on around me. And then also at the end of the day, you're like, hey, we're all humans and we're all open to our, fallibilities, and we're all still going to be kind of crude creatures at the end of it all. So maybe part of aligning expectations has to acknowledge that very reality too, that it's just always going to be with us. And in certain circles, like the therapeutic circle, it'll be far less than it is in some other circle that, holds rigidly to its biases and its traditions, for lack of a better expression. But you're right. It is a bummer. I don't want to be lumped in with a group that does that kind of thing. And I can reflect too. In our state, we've recently undergone a fight where we changed some laws, and we're no longer the only state in America that doesn't allow its professional counselors and its marriage and family therapists not to treat and diagnose psychotic disorders. And we're also the only state now that doesn't exclude its professional counselors from treating couples and families. And that was a huge fight because there's some hangers-on who were openly discriminatory against their own other colleagues by saying that it was academic discrimination is what it was, saying, well, you're not fit. You're not like us. You're not fit. You're not good enough. I was like, well, where do you get off? Well, I have a different education. Well, did you attend my school? Well, no, I didn't. But it's like, oh, come on, man, stop doing that.
Yeah, no, and I mean, wherever humans are involved, like there's going to be ego,
friction. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, the thing of it is that you're absolutely right. Like, we are all humans, we are all learning, we are all, we all have the capability to do better every day. And I think that was the most disappointing thing for me with that interaction, was that people really dug their heels in and became defensive, rather than just sort of saying, like, you're right. I was culturally insensitive, and guess what? I'm going to work on doing better, which is what sort of the reaction that I would expect from a competent therapist. And so that was, not the initial cultural insensitivity was like, ugh, but it was the fact that when they were confronted, there appeared to be no self-reflection, there appeared to be no self-analysis, there appeared to be no kind of like backing up and saying, wow, like, I didn't intend for this to be hurtful, but it was, and so I'm going to internalize that, and I'm going to try to learn how I can not do that again. And that's where I really found the disappointment to be.
And for those listening who may not be clinicians, and you wonder how this applies to you, if you're a client or you're thinking about counseling, but this is your proxy for it, until you decide to actually engage in the professional level of therapy. The reason it's relevant is because as clinicians, we need to be receptive to our clients' feedback. If they say, I didn't like that book recommendation, I don't understand where you're going with this, or maybe you're leading me the wrong direction, I'm not understanding this emotion thing that you're teaching me, Jake, because you're over my head. No, that's never happened to me. But we need to be able to be humble enough and take a one-down deferential position enough to say, oh, all right, hold on, let me check myself. What's working for you, what's not working for you, so that I don't just go running roughshod over you with what I think you need, because ultimately that's not just disrespectful, but and insensitive, but it can create harm, and it can cause lots of bad things to happen in a person, including up to and including, if you judge them and are sinister enough, they could probably take their own life. But let's back off that ledge a little bit and just say, well, they get turned so off the therapy that they never come back, and then they just live in misery. I mean, that's miserable because they took the one chance, they came in, therapists. We don't always get along with our clients. That's fine. We don't always click, but we want to continue building that rapport and working toward establishing a good relationship so that we can say critical things and point out foibles and and shine light in dark spots such that it's still comfortable and we can do it politely and compassionately. And if we do that and we're not listening to the feedback that says, don't stop, you're hurting me, we may end up pushing somebody away forever. And that's not good. And it's highly unethical. And what concerns me about the interaction you just described is that clinician may do that to a client. And so to the clients listening, or to the random listening audience who's not clinically geared, I would say, this is a good indicator that if you experience this in your sessions, or if you're with a family member and you're watching a family member experience it, including your own children, because sometimes we're really bad at children and we're better with adults, and your therapist isn't listening to you, terminate. I mean, obviously give them a chance, like, hey, correct this, please, because we by and large, we are very good at receiving feedback. Don't just pull the plug because you had an unpleasant session. Usually, by and large, we are supposed to have unpleasant sessions because disequilibrium is how we grow. But point that out. Say, hey, this was really uncomfortable for me, Jake. And then a good clinician will be able to explain his or her intentionality behind it. Say, well, I expected that. Thank you for pointing it out. Thank you for allowing yourself to let me make you uncomfortable. Here's what I had in mind. And then they can hem and haw it and then choose whether or not to come back. But at least they're bringing it to your attention. But if my response is, well, it's good for you, I know what's best, after all, you hired me, fire me. Because that's a terrible attitude to take.
Yeah, absolutely. Any defensiveness on the part of your therapist should be a big red flag. Like, therapists, we may feel defensive because we're humans and humans feel defensive sometimes. And that's like for us to work out, for
Right.
us to consult about and get supervision about, and maybe even talk to our own therapist about. So you may have a therapist who feels defensive, and you may even have a therapist who like names that in the room and kind of says like, oh man, that what you just said made me feel kind of defensive. And I think that's even appropriate sometimes.